My father's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Don't call me your father." The words landed hard, echoing against the pastel balloons and half-lit candles meant for my mother's birthday. Conversations died instantly. Forks froze mid-air. 30 pairs of eyes snapped toward me as if I'd done something unforgivable just by existing. My sister didn't look shocked, she smiled, small and satisfied. My mother stared at the cake, hands trembling, saying nothing. Then I noticed my sister's boyfriend. He was staring at me like he'd seen a ghost. And when our eyes met, he gasped, pale and shaking. She's my boss." I didn't answer him right away. I just stood there, holding a wrapped gift I'd spent weeks picking out, suddenly unsure where to put my hands. My father's jaw was set, his eyes cold, like he'd rehearsed that sentence long before tonight. I said, "Don't call me your father," he repeated, louder this time, as if volume could rewrite history. "You stopped being my responsibility years ago." The room stayed silent, but it wasn't empty. It was thick, heavy with judgment, curiosity, and relief that it wasn't happening to them. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else laughed nervously, thinking maybe this was a joke that went too far. It wasn't. I could tell by the way my father crossed his arms, shutting me out with his body as much as his words. I searched my mother's face, waiting for her to say something, anything. She didn't. Her eyes were glossy, fixed on the candles as if they were more important than the child standing in front of her. My sister leaned back in her chair, arms folded, watching like this was the ending she'd been waiting for. I felt something strange then. Not anger. Not even sadness. Just a quiet click inside my chest, like a door finally locking. For years, I'd explained his behavior to myself. He's stressed. He doesn't mean it. He'll come around. But standing there, being erased in front of strangers, I realized this wasn't a mistake. This was a decision. So I nodded once. No tears. No shouting. I swallowed every word I wanted to scream and let his sentence hang in the air. He thought silence meant defeat. He had no idea it meant restraint in our family. Love wasn't evenly distributed, it was ranked. My sister sat comfortably at the top, crowned early as the one who could do no wrong. She was loud, confident, praised for every small achievement. I was the quiet one. The independent one. The child who didn't need much, which somehow translated into the child who didn't deserve much either. Growing up, I learned the rules without anyone ever saying them out loud. My sister spoke, and the room listened. I spoke, and conversations continued right over me. If she made a mistake, it was excused. If I did, it was remembered. I wasn't punished often, I was ignored, which lasted longer and hurt deeper. My father admired strength, but only when it looked like obedience. He liked children who reflected well on him, who made him look successful and respected. My sister knew how to perform that role perfectly. I didn't. I asked questions. I noticed patterns. I learned early that approval in our house wasn't earned through effort, but through alignment. By my teenage years, I stopped competing. I stopped asking. I paid my own way when I could, stayed out late to avoid being home, and learned how to disappear in plain sight. Teachers praised my responsibility. Relatives called me so mature for my age. What they didn't see was how maturity became my armor, how being low maintenance was the only way I was allowed to exist. At family gatherings, my sister told stories and everyone laughed. I cleared plates, refilled drinks, and smiled when people forgot my name. It wasn't cruelty that shaped me, it was consistency. Over time, you stop expecting warmth from a place that's always been cold. So when my father disowned me at my mother's birthday party, it didn't come out of nowhere. It was simply the most honest thing he'd ever said to me, spoken out loud instead of implied. What made it harder wasn't the rejection, it was everything they never knew. Or maybe everything they chose not to see. While my sister chased passions funded by applause, I learned how to carry weight quietly. I took extra shifts. I said no to vacations. I built stability brick by brick while pretending it came easily. When the electricity almost got shut off one winter, I paid it. I didn't tell anyone. I transferred the money and let my parents believe it was a clerical error. When the car needed repairs, I covered it under the excuse of borrowing it for work. I became very good at solving problems without leaving fingerprints behind. There were months when my own account hovered dangerously low, but I never complained. I told myself this was what grown children did, help without expecting praise. When medical bills appeared, I handled them. When emergencies came up, I found a way. I watched my sister thank our parents for their support, while standing on ground I'd quietly reinforced. The irony was painful. I was labeled distant, ungrateful, even selfish at times, all while keeping the foundation from cracking. I didn't do it to be a hero. I did it because I knew what would happen if I didn't. Someone had to be responsible, and responsibility had already chosen me. Over time, silence became my language. I stopped explaining myself because explanations never changed anything. They just made people uncomfortable. So I smiled, nodded, and stayed in my lane. I let them believe whatever version of me was most convenient. Standing there at my mother's birthday, gift in hand, being erased with a single sentence, I realized something important. They didn't disown me that night. They had been benefiting from my absence for years, financially, emotionally, comfortably. All my father did was finally say out loud what everyone else had already been living by. The invitation came 3 weeks before my mother's birthday, delivered through a short, carefully worded text. No warmth. No excitement. Just the date, the time, and the address, as if I were being scheduled rather than invited. I stared at my phone longer than I should have, already feeling that familiar tension settle in my chest. A few minutes later, another message followed. Please don't bring up the past. This day is important to your father. I reread that sentence twice. Not important to my mother, important to him. The message wasn't a request. It was a warning. Come quietly. Don't take up space. Don't make anyone uncomfortable by existing too honestly. I considered declining. I had work deadlines, a dozen valid excuses, and every emotional reason to stay away. But birthdays have a way of pulling on old loyalties. Despite everything, I still loved my mother. Or at least, I loved the version of her I hoped would show up. So I replied with a simple, I'll be there. In the days leading up to the party, I felt a low hum of unease. I chose a modest gift, something thoughtful but not showy. I practiced conversations in my head, rehearsing neutrality like a survival skill. Smile. Keep answers short. Leave early if needed. I told myself this was about her, not them. That I could endure a few hours for the sake of peace. What I didn't realize was that peace had already been priced, and my silence was the currency. The house looked exactly the way it always did during celebrations, too clean, too staged, like no one actually lived there. Soft music played from a speaker in the corner, the kind meant to fill silence without drawing attention. Streamers hung neatly along the walls, and the smell of catered food floated through the room, warm and heavy. Everything screamed normal, which somehow made it worse. Relatives and family friends clustered in small groups, laughing a little too loudly, sipping drinks they didn't really want. I moved through the room carefully, greeting people who seemed surprised to see me, as if I were an unexpected guest rather than family. Some smiled politely. Others avoided eye contact altogether. I recognized that look, the unspoken question of why I was there. My sister was already holding court near the dining table, telling a story with dramatic hand gestures while my father stood beside her, nodding proudly. She looked confident, glowing, perfectly at home. When she noticed me, her smile tightened just slightly before she turned away, dismissing me without a word. That's when I noticed him, my sister's boyfriend. He stood a few steps back from the group, hands in his pockets, posture stiff. At first, I thought he was just nervous. Then our eyes met. His expression changed instantly. The color drained from his face, and he looked away too quickly, like he'd been caught staring at something forbidden. I frowned, confused. I was certain we'd never been formally introduced, yet there was something unsettlingly familiar in the way he kept glancing back at me. Each time, his discomfort grew more obvious. He whispered something to my sister, who waved him off, annoyed. I told myself it was nothing. Parties make people awkward. Families make things tense. I took a breath and stepped further into the room, unaware that this fragile calm, this carefully arranged illusion, was seconds away from shattering completely. That I tried to ignore him, but it was impossible. Every time I shifted positions, every time I laughed politely at someone's comment, I could feel his eyes tracking me. Not in a way that felt inappropriate, more like he was watching a ticking clock, waiting for something inevitable to happen. The longer the night went on, the more unsettled he became. When my sister pulled him closer, looping her arm through his shoulders stiffened instead of relaxing. She introduced him proudly to relatives, listing his achievements like bullet points. He nodded, smiled, played his part, but his attention kept drifting back to me. Each glance carried a question he seemed too afraid to ask. I replayed my memory, searching for where I might know him from. Networking events. Industry conferences. A forgotten meeting. My professional life intersected with hundreds of people, most of them faces that blurred together over time. Still, recognition hovered just out of reach, like a name on the tip of my tongue. At one point, he walked past me toward the kitchen and paused. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. "Hi," he said, voice strained, as if the word alone took effort. I nodded back, returning the greeting without giving it weight. His hands trembled as he reached for a glass of water. My sister noticed. "Are you okay?" she asked sharply, irritation creeping into her voice. He forced a laugh and said he was fine, just tired. She rolled her eyes and turned back to her audience, unaware, or unwilling, to see the panic rising beside her. That's when it hit me. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't nerves. This was recognition. Something about me didn't fit the story my family had been telling. I didn't belong in the box they'd built, and he knew it. Whatever he thought he knew about me was colliding with what he was seeing now. I felt a strange calm settle over me. For the first time that evening, I wasn't bracing myself. I was waiting. Because whatever was unfolding, it wasn't going to stay hidden for long, and the truth, once noticed, has a way of demanding to be heard. That it happened quickly, the way explosions always do after a long, quiet countdown. My father set his glass down a little too hard, the sound sharp enough to cut through the room. Conversations slowed. He cleared his throat, already standing taller, already preparing to take control of the moment. I knew that posture. I'd seen it my entire life. He looked directly at me, not with anger, but with something colder, finality. "I don't know why you came," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The room went still. My mother's smile faltered, her hands tightening around the edge of the table. My sister turned, eyes bright with anticipation. "I've tried to be patient," my father continued. "But you insist on bringing tension wherever you go. This family has moved on, and you should too." Each word was measured, deliberate, like he was delivering a verdict rather than expressing a feeling. I felt every eye swing toward me again, waiting for a reaction. I opened my mouth to speak, but he raised a hand, silencing me. "No. Enough. Don't call me your father," he said, voice unwavering. "You made your choices. from this point on, you're on your own." The sentence landed like a door slamming shut, echoing through the room. My mother whispered his name, but it was too late. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at me either. He stared past me, already erasing my presence. Someone near the back of the room gasped softly. Others stared at the floor, suddenly fascinated by their shoes. I stood there, heart pounding, feeling strangely weightless. Years of walking on eggshells, of trying to earn something freely given to others, collapsed into a single moment of clarity. This wasn't discipline. It wasn't disappointment. It was rejection, carefully dressed up as righteousness. My sister didn't hide her smile. It flickered across her face before she masked it, but I saw it. She'd won. At least, she thought she had. What no one noticed was the shift in the room, the subtle tension, the growing discomfort, the sense that something had gone terribly wrong. And behind them all, my sister's boyfriend had gone completely pale, staring at me like the ground had just disappeared beneath his feet. The silence after my father's words felt unnatural, like the air itself was holding its breath. No one moved. No one spoke. It was the kind of pause that begs to be filled, and everyone was waiting for me to do it, waiting for tears, anger, anything that would confirm their judgment. I gave them nothing. That's when I heard it. A sharp inhale, loud and unmistakable. Someone gasping like they just realized they were standing on the wrong side of a collapsing bridge. Heads turned toward the sound, confusion rippling through the room. It wasn't coming from me. It was coming from behind my sister. Her boyfriend had gone completely still. His eyes were locked on my face, wide and terrified, like he was looking at a mistake he couldn't undo. His lips parted, and for a moment it seemed like he might pass out right there on the hardwood floor. "Wait," he said, voice cracking. The word slipped out before he could stop it. My sister spun toward him, irritated. "What is wrong with you?" she hissed under her breath. He didn't answer her. He couldn't take his eyes off me. He took a step forward, then another, as if pulled by gravity. His hands were shaking now, openly, no longer hidden in his pockets. This can't be," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. People exchanged glances, the mood shifting from smug curiosity to uneasy confusion. My father frowned, clearly annoyed that his moment was being interrupted. "Who are you, exactly?" he snapped at the boyfriend. That only made it worse. The man swallowed hard, his throat bobbing as he tried to speak. I recognized that look then, not fear of conflict, but fear of consequence. The kind that comes when reality crashes into a carefully maintained lie. Whatever he was about to say wasn't planned. It wasn't strategic. It was a reflex. He looked at me one last time, searching my face for permission I didn't give. Then, with a broken laugh that sounded more like a sob, he said the words that shifted the entire night off its axis, and changed everything they thought they knew about me. She's my boss." The words didn't land all at once. They echoed, bounced, and fractured as they moved through the room, colliding with disbelief on every face. My sister laughed first, a short, sharp sound meant to dismiss the idea before it could grow teeth. "That's not funny," she said, waving her hand. "You're embarrassing me." But he wasn't joking. His eyes never left mine as he nodded slowly, like each movement cost him effort. "I work for her company," he said. "I didn't realize. I didn't know this was your family." His voice dropped on the last word, as if it suddenly carried weight he hadn't accounted for. My father stepped forward, irritation flaring. "That's impossible," he said flatly. "She doesn't run a company." He gestured toward me without looking, already convinced of his own version of reality. The room murmured in agreement, people clinging to the familiar story because the alternative felt uncomfortable. "I report directly to her," the boyfriend continued, words spilling faster now. "She's the founder." The final decision maker. Everyone answers to her. He rubbed his palms together, panic setting in as understanding dawned. I didn't make the connection until tonight. My sister's face drained of color. Stop, she whispered, but he couldn't. Not now. The truth had slipped out, and it wasn't going back in. He turned slightly, addressing the room like a witness who'd accidentally taken the stand. He named the company. The scale. The projects. The authority I held without ever mentioning it at home. Every eye turned back to me, searching for denial. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let it stretch. Let it sting. Let it rearrange the power in the room. Finally, I spoke, not loudly, not defensively. I didn't think my work was relevant tonight, I said calmly. This was Mom's birthday. No one answered. My father's certainty cracked, just enough to let doubt seep in. In that moment, everything they thought they knew about me began to unravel, and there was nothing they could do to stop it that I hadn't planned on explaining myself. Not that night. Not ever. But once the truth was out, it had a gravity of its own, pulling everything into alignment whether I wanted it to or not. The room felt smaller now, like the walls had shifted inward to listen. I took a breath, steady and controlled. I never hid what I do, I said. I just stopped announcing it to people who never asked. My voice didn't shake. That surprised even me. I built my company quietly. While everyone was busy deciding who I was working. The boyfriend nodded quickly, relieved I was speaking. She started it years ago, he added. Small at first. Then it grew. She hires carefully. She doesn't tolerate excuses. He stopped himself, realizing he was still talking about me like I wasn't standing there. Old habits die hard. I continued. I kept my life separate because every time I shared something good, it was minimized. Or questioned. Or used against me. I looked directly at my father then. So I learned to keep my wins to myself. There was a ripple of discomfort. My mother's eyes widened, as if pieces were finally connecting, late nights, missed calls, the vague answers I'd given for years. She pressed her hand to her chest, breath shallow. I didn't need validation, I went on. I needed peace. And silence gave me that. I paused, letting the words settle. The money I helped with. The emergencies that somehow worked themselves out. That wasn't luck. My sister shifted, her confidence cracking. You're exaggerating, she said weakly. But her voice lacked conviction. The boyfriend shook his head. She's not, he said. She's the reason half of us still have jobs. That did it. The room changed completely. What had once been dismissal turned into calculation. People reevaluated every interaction, every assumption. I could see it in their eyes, the sudden need to understand me differently now that I fit a definition they respected. But it was too late for that. I didn't build my life to impress this room, I said softly. I built it so I'd never have to beg for a seat at any table again. No one interrupted. No one argued. My father stood frozen, staring at the person he thought he'd erased, now realizing she'd been standing on her own the entire time that my sister was the first one who couldn't hide it anymore. The confidence she'd carried all evening drained from her face, replaced by something raw and unfamiliar. Her eyes flicked between me and her boyfriend, searching for a version of reality that would still place her at the center. It didn't exist. You're lying to me, she said to him, her voice sharp with panic. You told me you were up for a promotion. You said your boss was some older guy. Her words came faster now, unraveling as she spoke them. He swallowed hard, guilt written all over his face. I didn't think it mattered, he said quietly. I didn't know who you were related to. And honestly, I didn't think you'd ever meet. The honesty only made it worse. The truth wasn't just that I was his boss, it was that I was someone he respected, someone he feared disappointing. My sister laughed, but it sounded hollow. So what, you work for her, she snapped, gesturing toward me like I was an inconvenience. That doesn't mean anything. But even as she said it, her shoulders slumped. She knew it did. She knew exactly what it meant. People were watching now, openly. No more pretending not to notice. The golden child was slipping, and there was no one rushing in to steady her. Her boyfriend took a small step away from her, instinctive, protective, not of her, but of himself. I can't pretend this isn't a problem, he said, his voice low. She decides who stays. Who advances. Who leaves. He didn't say it to threaten her. He said it because it was true. My sister turned to our father, desperate. Say something, she demanded. But he didn't. He couldn't. The authority he usually wielded so easily felt useless here. In that moment, her world cracked, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that couldn't be repaired. The hierarchy she relied on no longer protected her, and for the first time, she was standing exactly where she'd pushed me for years, exposed, uncertain, and suddenly very small. My father recovered faster than anyone else. He always did. Control was his instinct, and when it slipped, he reached for it with both hands. He straightened his posture, cleared his throat, and stepped back into the center of the room like a man reclaiming a stage he believed belonged to him. Well, he said, forcing a tight smile, this changes things. His tone softened, suddenly reasonable, as if the last 20 minutes hadn't happened. We may have spoken too harshly earlier. He glanced at me briefly, not long enough to be an apology. Emotions run high at family events. I recognized the maneuver immediately. Rewrite the moment. Dilute the damage. Pretend nothing irreversible had been said. He spoke about unity, about misunderstandings, about how families should support one another. Each word was carefully chosen to restore his position without acknowledging fault. I let him finish. Then I shook my head, slow and deliberate. No, I said quietly. The single word cut through his speech more effectively than shouting ever could. The room stilled again. You don't get to undo that, I continued. You didn't speak in anger. You spoke with certainty. I met his eyes, holding them for the first time in my life without flinching. And I listened. His jaw tightened. You're being dramatic, he snapped, irritation leaking through the cracks. This isn't how family handles disagreements. That's true, I replied. Family doesn't disown their child in front of guests. There it was. The line he couldn't cross back over. He opened his mouth, then closed it. For once, he had nothing prepared. No authority left to invoke. I'm not here to punish anyone, I said. I'm just done negotiating my worth. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable this time. It was decisive. My father looked around, realizing too late that the room no longer belonged to him. The power he'd held for decades didn't vanish, it simply stopped working. And there was nothing he could say that could make it come back that I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten anyone. That's what surprised them most. Power, when it's real, doesn't need volume. I picked up my coat, signaling something far more final than anger. I'm leaving, I said, calm and steady. But before I do, there are things that need to be clear. I explained my boundaries without drama. I would no longer be the silent solution to problems I wasn't allowed to acknowledge. The support I'd given quietly, consistently, for years would end. Not out of spite, but out of honesty. I won't fund disrespect, I said. And I won't subsidize contempt. My mother finally spoke then, her voice small and shaken. She asked what that meant. I looked at her gently. It means I'm stepping back, I said. From fixing, from covering, from pretending everything is fine when it isn't. Tears slid down her cheeks, but she didn't argue. Somewhere deep down, she understood. My father said nothing. He watched me like someone studying the edge of a cliff they hadn't realized was there. My sister crossed her arms, defensive, but the certainty she usually wore like armor was gone. She was doing calculations now, weighing what she'd lose without ever having known she depended on me. I didn't ask for apologies. I didn't demand accountability. I simply withdrew my presence. That was the consequence. I placed my mother's gift on the table, untouched, and leaned down to kiss her cheek. "Happy birthday," I whispered. "I hope next year is quieter." As I walked out, no one followed me. No one stopped me. And that was fine. The revenge wasn't humiliation or shouting or a final cruel sentence. It was absence. It was letting them feel the space I'd always filled without credit. Outside, the night air felt lighter. I breathed deeply, realizing something important. I hadn't won anything. I'd reclaimed it. And sometimes, the most powerful way to end a story is not with a bang, but with the sound of a door closing softly behind you. I didn't hear from them for a while after that night. No angry messages. No apologies either. Just silence, the kind that tells you everyone is recalculating. For the first time in my life, that silence didn't feel like rejection. It felt like space. In the weeks that followed, I thought a lot about power. Growing up, I'd been taught it belonged to the loudest voice in the room, the person who could shame others into obedience. But standing on the other side of that door, I realized real power doesn't need witnesses. It shows up quietly, consistently, and only reveals itself when tested. I didn't cut my family off in anger. I didn't announce a dramatic ending. I simply stopped shrinking. I stopped explaining. I stopped hoping someone would eventually choose me. That shift changed everything. When you stop begging for approval, people feel it immediately, even if they don't understand why. My sister's boyfriend transferred departments a month later. Professionally, I treated him no differently than anyone else. Fairness was always my rule. My sister and I don't speak now. Not because I forbid it, but because the version of me she understood no longer exists. My father never apologized. But he also never disowned me again. The silence between us is different now, careful, restrained. He knows the words he uses matter, because this time, I listened and acted accordingly. As for my mother, we speak quietly. Carefully. There are things she still can't say, and things I no longer ask her to. Love, I've learned, doesn't always come in the way you need it to, but self-respect does. Looking back, that night wasn't about being disowned. It was about being revealed, to them, and to myself. I walked in as the invisible daughter they could dismiss. I walked out as someone they could no longer define. Power isn't loud. It doesn't argue. It doesn't beg. It waits. And when the moment comes, it simply stands up and leaves, taking its worth with it.